On September 7th, 1191, 12,000 exhausted crusaders battered, bloodied, and pushed to the brink of collapse, turned, and obliterated 30,000 of Saladin's finest warriors in just 17 minutes. What happened in those final moments at Arsuf would shatter the myth of Saladin's invincibility forever. 700 Crusader casualties, 7,000 Muslim dead, a 10.1 kill ratio that defied every law of medieval warfare. The fate of the Holy Land and perhaps all of Christendom hung on a single cavalry charge. By the end of this video, you'll understand how Richard the Lionheart orchestrated the most devastating counterattack in crusading history. Why Saladin's greatest strength became his fatal weakness. And the 17 minutes that changed medieval warfare forever. But here's what the chronicles don't tell you. Richard had been waiting for this moment for 7 agonizing days. What made him wait until his men were dying? How could exhausted knights who'd marched for days in brutal heat suddenly explode with such devastating force? And why did Saladin's battle-hardened veterans flee from an army they outnumbered more than 2 to 1? The answer lies in the deadliest weapon of the medieval world. Not the lance, not the sword, but something far more powerful. Discipline forged in desperation. Jerusalem itself hung in the balance that September morning. The Third Crusade's survival depended on a single trumpet blast, a signal that would either save Christianity's presence in the Holy Land or see it drowned in blood. To understand how 12,000 men shattered 30,000, we need to step back 7 days, to when 2 of history's greatest military minds began their deadly chess match on the coastal plains of the Levant. Richard had just secured Acre after a brutal 2-year siege. The Lionheart, King of England, Duke of Normandy, Count of Anjou, stood as Christendom's greatest warrior king. But across the dusty plains waited his match, Saladin, the Kurdish Sultan whose very name meant righteous of the faith, the man who'd recaptured Jerusalem and shattered Crusader power at the disaster of Hattin just 4 years earlier. This wasn't just a battle between armies. It was a collision between 2 military philosophies, 2 faiths, and 2 men who respected each other even as they sought the other's destruction. After Hattin in 1187, where Saladin had annihilated the Crusader army and captured the True Cross, the Muslim world believed the Frankish threat was finished. Jerusalem had fallen. The coastal cities surrendered one by one. Christianity's century-old presence in the Holy Land seemed doomed. Then came the Third Crusade, and with it, Richard the Lionheart. The 33-year-old English king had already proven himself the finest military mind in Europe. But Saladin, at 53, commanded an empire stretching from Egypt to Syria, with decades of experience fighting Frankish knights. He knew their strengths, the devastating heavy cavalry charge, and he knew their weaknesses, heat, impatience, and the burden of their own armor. The next 60 seconds would determine the fate of the Holy Land. After taking Acre, Richard faced a critical decision. March inland directly to Jerusalem or secure the coast first. He chose the conservative route south along the Mediterranean to Jaffa, keeping his fleet close for supplies. It seemed safe, logical, predictable. Saladin smiled when his scouts reported Richard's choice. The Sultan had been planning for exactly this move. The 80-mile coastal road from Acre to Jaffa passed through perfect ambush country. Rolling hills on the left, the sea on the right. No room to maneuver, nowhere to run. The Crusaders would be trapped in a narrow corridor of death. But here's what the chronicles don't tell you about these 2 commanders. They weren't just generals. They were students of each other. Richard had studied every battle Saladin had won. Saladin had interrogated captured knights about Richard's tactics in Europe. Each knew the other's playbook. What followed would be more than a battle. It would be a masterclass in patience, deception, and the art of springing a trap on someone who knows it's there. As August turned to September, 30,000 Muslim warriors gathered in the hills above the coastal road. Richard's 12,000 men began their march south, knowing full well what awaited them. But as Richard's army began its march south, Saladin had already set his trap. The Sultan's strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Bleed them slowly, break their discipline, then annihilate them when they finally snapped. The armies that gathered for this clash represented the pinnacle of medieval warfare. Richard's force of 12,000 was small but elite. At its heart, 2,000 mounted knights, including 300 hospitallers in the vanguard. 300 Templars guarding the rear, warrior monks whose discipline was legendary. The remaining 1,400 knights came from England, France, Normandy, and the Crusade estates. Each knight was a walking fortress. 40 lb of chainmail, massive helm, kite shield, 12-foot lance, and broadsword. Supporting them, 10,000 infantry. Half spearmen with shields, half crossbowmen whose bolts could punch through Muslim armor at 200 yards. But their greatest asset wasn't their weapons. It was their formation. Richard had drilled them relentlessly in a defensive box that moved like a single organism. Shields overlapping, spears bristling outward, crossbowmen protected in the center. Then Saladin made his fatal error by choosing the wrong battlefield psychology. His host of 30,000 was built for mobility and harassment. The core, 10,000 Mamluk heavy cavalry, slave soldiers trained from childhood, the finest horsemen in the Islamic world. Saladin's cavalry wore light leather and mail armor built purely for speed, not for long, brutal clashes. Their composite bows could unleash 12 arrows a minute, while curved sabers waited for close combat. Each warrior had multiple fresh horses, 3 or 4, to maintain endless mobility. Behind them marched 20,000 more, Bedouin scouts, Turkish horse archers, Kurdish infantry, and Egyptian regulars. But Saladin's true weapons were psychological. Thunderous drums, clashing cymbals, and blinding dust clouds were used to rattle the Crusaders. Arrows fell constantly, less to kill, more to crush their resolve. The killing ground was ready, but not in the way Saladin expected. The coastal plain near Arsuf offered everything the Sultan needed for his trap. The ancient Roman road ran 2 miles from the sea, flanked by dunes and scrub, ideal ambush cover. To the east, the forested Samarian hills hid Muslim cavalry waiting to strike. The Crusaders had to march through a 10-mile gauntlet with no way to retreat. But within their ranks, a single knight's impatience was about to alter everything. The stage was set for one of history's greatest battlefield reversals. The heat became a second enemy. September. Temperatures soared past 115 degrees. Their 40-pound armor turned into blazing ovens under the desert sky. Water was rationed, and every well nearby was controlled by the enemy. Richard understood the mathematics of attrition. Every hour marching drained strength. Every arrow tested discipline. Saladin bet everything that the Crusaders would eventually snap and charge. It had worked at Hattin and against every Frankish army for decades. But this time the ground began to shake. 30,000 Muslim horsemen shadowed every mile of the march. On September 3rd, as the Crusaders left Acre, Muslim outriders appeared along the eastern hills. The deadly chess match had officially begun. Both commanders believed they could predict the other's next move. Then Richard did something that defied every rule of medieval warfare. Instead of rushing to Jaffa, he slowed the army to just 10 miles per day. 3 days of marching stretched into 8 by Richard's command. It seemed like madness, giving Saladin more time, more attacks, more freedom. On September 3rd, the deadliest game of patience in history began. At sunrise, the first arrows came, a whistling drizzle from the hills, not a single volley, just a constant, maddening rain of death. Saladin's horse archers swept in, fired, and vanished before crossbows could respond. This wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to torture. Richard's reaction revealed his brilliance. The Crusader army moved in 3 perfect columns. Hospitallers led the van. Richard rode under the royal banner. Templars guarded the rear. The baggage train crawled between infantry and sea, shielded from attack. The knights remained mounted, but refused to charge. Their endurance under fire was the heart of Richard's strategy. By day 2, the attacks escalated, the arrows grew heavier, the cavalry bolder. A Hospitaller knight took an arrow straight through his eye. Another's horse collapsed beneath him. Every instinct inside the Crusader knights screamed to charge. These men were bred for offense. Watching comrades die without striking back was torture. But Richard's orders were absolute. No charges without the signal. 3 trumpet blasts. Only then could the charge begin. Any man who broke formation would be executed. Richard rode up and down the line, his sheer presence holding discipline together. "Let them waste arrows on our shields. Our time will come," he commanded. By day 3, Muslim chroniclers claimed over 400,000 arrows had been fired, yet the Crusader formation still held firm. Crossbowmen fired back relentlessly, killing 400 Muslim warriors in 3 days. Saladin accepted the losses. His cavalry had endless arrows. The Crusaders didn't. Day 4 brought a new enemy, the unbearable heat. Men marched in full armor, sweat blinding them, tongues swelling with thirst. Knights cooked inside their mail, horses foamed and stumbled. The army slowed. 10 miles per day became 8, then 6. Day 5 shocked even Richard. Saladin committed more forces. The Templars at the rear were hit so hard they had to ride backward in their saddles to fight. Humiliating, but tactically brilliant. Their backward wall of steel kept horse archers from closing in. From dawn to dusk, Muslim drums thundered, cymbals clashed, war cries echoed, arrows screamed. Some younger knights finally cracked, charging ahead alone and dying immediately in the trap. Their screams carried back through the Crusader ranks like a warning from death itself. Day 6 pushed the Hospitallers to the brink. Every knight bore wounds. Dead horses lined the road in front of them. Master Garnier de Nablus watched his brotherhood bleed without striking back. His officers warned him, "The men are at their limit." Discipline was stretching to its breaking point. Richard reorganized the line. Fresh knights moved to the front, the wounded to the center. But he refused to speed the march. He would not give Saladin an open running battle. 10 miles became 8, 8 became 6. Every mile paid for in blood. Accounts described knights marching with arrows sticking from their armor like iron porcupines. One Templar fought on with 6 arrows in his body, collapsed only when the 7th hit his neck. By the 7th day, Saladin realized the truth. The Crusaders had not broken. They were coiled tighter than a siege spring ready to explode. Tomorrow they would reach the fortified camp at Arsuf. Saladin's window was closing. The Sultan made a fateful decision. He would commit everything on the next day. No more harassment. Tomorrow would be the decisive battle. That night, Richard gathered his commanders for final orders. "Tomorrow, Saladin will throw everything at us. He must. It's his last chance," Richard told them. He didn't finish the thought because everyone knew what came next. September 7th arrived, the day Richard would turn patience into a weapon. The Crusaders formed up, battered, bloodied, but unbroken. Only 5 miles remained to reach safety, but Saladin unleashed his full might. This was no harassment. Saladin committed his entire host. His plan was clear. smash the Crusader rear, spark panic, and collapse the entire line. Taqi al-Din commanded the right wing, 8,000 veteran riders. 10,000 Mamluks held the center, Saladin's most elite warriors. Another 8,000 rode on the left under Muzaffar al-Din. The rest formed a large reserve, ready to exploit the break. 7 days of arrow storms had shredded the Hospitallers' nerves. They were ready to explode. They had watched comrades die while unable to retaliate. Insults shouted from Muslim skirmishers cut deeper than arrows. Master Garnier de Nablus could no longer contain his rage. When Taqi al-Din personally charged the Hospitaller banner, discipline finally snapped. Garnier shouted, "I can bear this no longer," and spurred forward without orders. 300 Hospitallers followed instantly. The premature charge had begun. Richard had seconds to choose, abandon them or commit the entire army. He didn't hesitate. He ordered the full charge. 3 trumpet blasts split the air, the moment every crusader had prayed for. 2,000 knights surged forward, not a wild charge, but a disciplined steel wedge. The ground shook as the Crusader cavalry unleashed 7 days of fury in one unstoppable charge.